compromise of the social movement because you need donors to fund your legal campaign. I think it's much cheaper and much more effective to go with grassroots movement. Moreover, we think that courts are reliant on legislation. In most countries, we're not looking at the United States in this debate, we're looking at the world. I think in most countries the courts exist to enforce laws. So if you don't change legislation in the parliament in the first place, you're not going to be able to get courts to overrule that because they simply can't do that, it's not in their mandate. You're attacking the chicken before the egg. Moreover, we think that there are potential harms to going to the court. In what way? Well, first of all, there's a possibility that you'll get a ruling against you. And we think that if this happens, you lose legitimacy as a movement, but moreover, we think that the finality of a court decision is very serious because it sets a legal precedent that if Wade had won in Roe versus Wade, we think that the women in America would have a serious and irreversible problem in that country, that we think that's a very dangerous gamble for you to go for if you don't have popular support backing you. Even if you do get a good ruling from the court, though, we see two further problems. The first is in terms of the buy-in of the people, because people resent the imposition of a court's will on their democratic power. We think that they feel that they are bypassed when a court goes against what they feel their country should look like. We look at animal rights in South Africa, for example, where our constitutional court ruled that animal sacrifices should be banned. But they bypassed the majority who practice sacrifice as a traditional Zulu culture. And so you still got sacrifices happening, and you got people, you got serious tensions between society, between the two groups who are advocating different sides. I think that if people support a judgment that you achieve, you would have achieved that judgment through popular support and legislative change anyway. If they resent the judgment, all that you get is you get continued harms in terms of discrimination, in terms of backlash from society. Lastly, though, we think that you antagonize the government. Why? Because the government is publicly embarrassed when a court rules against them. They've wasted a huge amount of money on a lengthy court case. You lose their sympathy, and we think that the legislature can then act out, circumvent the law, find ways around it. You still get all of those harms. And so in conclusion, we want grassroots change. We want real change. And we want a kind of change that requires an engagement with the majority and an engagement with the people. Only if you do that first can you get real and meaningful change in society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll continue the case of opposition to last week's
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it spoke to the callousness of this opposition team who, in response to the greatest champions for civil rights, including Roe v. Wade, they simply said the women in America would want legislation that allows them an abortion. That the children in Arkansas would want legislation that leads to desegregation. The problem with that is that Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act 20 years after Brown v. Board of Education. In a country where abortion is still unpopular, that bill the woman was waiting for could never have come. The opposition needed to deal with the reality of the political system, which cripples social action in this debate. Two things to look at in rebuttal. First of all, is this more democratic to speak to the people? And second, is that going to lead to better outcomes? First, let's be very clear on the burden in this debate because the opposition tried to obfuscate. This idea of the acceptable and legitimate change they needed to act. We didn't need to prove that courts got it right every single time, nor that courts were the only way of doing it. We needed to prove on a comparison that they were better than the legislature. So insofar as acceptable and legitimate change exists in this debate, it exists for you guys as well. Second, this thing they brought up in a point of information about a functioning government. That's a ridiculous bar to set on democracies if you're discounting the United States in the way that it discriminates against gay people. Just the way that we would say that this tournament is a functioning tournament but not a perfect tournament, we would say idea that we need to respect the will of the people. First thing to say about that is they said sometimes they get it wrong. They never discuss the extent to which they get it wrong and the harms when they get it wrong. What it means when a majority white population in America gets the crucial issue of civil rights wrong, denying children a quality education. What it means for them to continue to be wrong about gay rights, preventing people from marrying those they love most. Those failures continue to exist, they need to deal with that. Insofar as democracy is important, equality is an important value of that, it was our side that stood for it. But second of all, and this was material they never responded to, we told you that democracy inherently had failed in this interest because of the different levels of interest in particular issues. Because while gay people vote number one on gay issues, or some gay people do, the majority of the population, that comes about 10th after the economy, environment, and so forth. That's why the majority of most Western liberal democracies support gay marriage, but it continues to be banned. That's a failure they need to deal with. Second, and this is where they lay their case, this will lead to worse outcomes, this will lead to superficial outcomes. First, on backlash. The first thing to say about that is just because there is an active harm, like mobs and so forth, that's not necessarily any worse than the passive harm of denying people their rights. That's not as visible, that's not going to come up on the newspaper in the way that some lynch mobs will, but it's still a deprivation of the right to education, the right to love for generations of people. Insofar as Brown v. Board of Education and abortion rulings led to those kinds of problems, at least the majority of those children accessed an education. At least the women who are harassed, unfortunately, can go past those protesters and take control of her own body. That's a change that we would never have gotten under the opposition. It's furthermore visible in a context in which the United States Congress has like 2% approval rating that they have legitimacy where the Supreme Court doesn't, right? If like they pass something about animal sacrifice, which sounds like a great bill by the way, like we don't think that necessarily would have been met with the same level of public support. Second, they gave you a bunch of problems with courts. First, they told you it was lengthy. Like, deal with the filibustering that happens in every Congress around the world. In terms of the unique donors for legal cases, we told you you're more likely to get a pro bono lawyer rather than an interest group to support you, because these minority groups don't have the money and they don't have the political enfranchisement that you need. Second, they told you you're reliant on legislation, something about chickens and eggs here. But that never dealt with the empirical reality that it was cases like Brown v. Board of Education that led to the civil rights movement. That, when the government passed DOMA, no thanks, the Defense of Marriage Act, like strengthening the resolve against granting gay people rights, that it seems to be the Supreme Court that's going to overrule it. I'm going to look at 2 points as standards. No thanks. First, the doctrine of precedent leads to permanent change. We think it's important for 2 reasons. First, it entrenches the progress that you've made. The best that you can do in instances like Brown v. Board of Education is to try and obstruct the process of that rights being enforced, rather than allowing that right to exist in the first instance. We think that's a shame that happens, but it's better than the alternative. We compare that to the legislature, where the Tea Party is promising to strengthen the defense of the Marriage Act, where all of them, and we would posit that under the opposition's model, the Republican Party probably would have overturned abortion had it been passed through legislation rather than through the Supreme Court, because you give them an immediate mechanism of the election to get rid of people's rights. The second reason is because each case strengthens the rationale for equality. Yes, ma'am?
You do understand that in the U.S. Supreme Court, the judges are appointed based on the majority party.
Yes, but that is they're appointed with aside for their judicial expertise. We compare that to actually voting for people who have those kinds of decisions, right? And insofar as Democrats are more likely to choose left-leaning, they get it wrong all the time. So John Paul Souter turned out to be this really left-wing person that a conservative admitted. That's because those people work with things like judicial oversight and work under rule of law. Back on this. We think the benefits of there being precedent is that first, it upholds rights for generations upon generations. We think a single generation being deprived of change they've already achieved is terrible, and that's far more likely to occur under a legislature. But second of all, we think consistency is important as an end in and of itself, because you need to be able to have a narrative as a movement of saying that you are moving towards progress rather than you are oscillating between periods of goodness and periods of stagnation. We think that's problematic. Second point of substandard. Court cases better unify communities. Most social movements disagree about two things. Disagree about two major things. And under the legislature, you make them choose an alternative, whereas in courts you embrace a multiplicity. Two ways in which that happens. First, on the issues to focus on. Because of the way the media works, because of the way that getting a social movement works, it means the gay rights movement has to focus on something like gay marriage and get it done, and once that's done, there's a sense of complacency about it. We compare that to how we got rid of Jim Crow laws, where multiple different communities in the South were able to wage court cases against education, against transport, against the workplace, and how that multiplicity of issues led to unity. But second, it leads to unity over strategy. Because rather than arguing about media bias in certain counties where you can be most receptive, you have a single established routine that you go through before a court case, which is to prove on a balance of probabilities that your case is more constitutional or in keeping with the legal framework. Again, unity matters for the longevity of movements because it shows that they can be together, they can strive for further action, and they can keep their members interested. We think the unity of community is enhanced under the court system rather than the legislature. Ladies and gentlemen, insofar as democracy matters, it matters because it's the institution that upholds equality. The way to achieve that in instances where there is a failure is through the courts, not the legislature. We're proud to propose.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the second speaker side.
Now, in all honesty, South Africa has never really considered Australia the most advanced country. But what we do think is problematic in this debate, and is evident in their examples, is that they do seem to be stuck in the past somewhat. They're living in an age where bottom-up change is simply impossible, where people can't communicate to each other, where being able to convince a majority of your opinions is simply impossible, because if you're a minority, you don't have that power to communicate. You don't have that power to create change. We think realistically, we're no longer living in the 50s. We're not in an age where it is that hard to convey your thoughts to other people, to convince people of change. We think that social movements have changed a lot over the last few years. That it's no longer a case of the civil rights being restricted to one country, being restricted to certain areas, to certain communities, to certain groups. We'd say that realistically, social movements have become a global issue. It's something that's far more widespread, and in that way, is something that is far easier to put through elected legislature. So what we'd like Australia to do for the rest of this debate is come back to the real world, the current world, the world that actually has social networks, the world that has viral videos, the world that has the ability to create real change, not just say, well, if you're a minority, you don't have the numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not all about the numbers in today's debate. It's about the power to convince and the power to change. We think that that's the critical issue that Saul gave you from the beginning, about convincing majorities, about bringing the people onto your side, and about how just having a piece of paper that says you have a right isn't going to really give you proper social change if you have a majority that doesn't believe you deserve it. On that level, we tell you that elected legislatures are a far more effective way to create change, they're a far more acceptable way to create change, and they're far more representative. So Australia, until you start contending on that ground, we don't think that you're effectively entering that debate. So let's look at what else Saul told you that we don't think has been responded to. Well, we think Saul told you that there's serious dangers to courts. If you have a ruling made against you, not only does that delegitimize your cause, but it also sets legal precedent against you. That's very dangerous if you're not going to go through an elected legislature first. We didn't really hear a response from Bo, so we'd like one in the third. What else did he tell you? Well, he told you that they're extremely expensive and they're hard to do, right? It's hard to go through a court procedure, especially when you're talking about something that's legislative. Why? Because it means you're necessarily going against the government. That's pretty hard when they have endless resources, when they have a group that's willing to go against you. When we heard, well, you can get a pro bono lawyer, we don't think that's really good enough in today's debate because there's a reason you pay so much for certain lawyers. It's because they'll win. That's why, if you have more resources, you're able to do a better job. We don't think that saying that these movements can have free lawyers is good enough to say that they're going to be able to create this real change. And then what else did Saul tell you? Well, he also told you that if you do win, you're actually just antagonizing a government that we've conceded is a majority that's against you. That what we haven't heard once from Australia is any incentive to bring the majority onto our side. That realistically all they've told us is that what we're trying to do is steamroll the majority that's against us because we can technically get change on paper. We think that realistically that's not the change that's going to be real, right? What they're actually doing is antagonizing a majority and antagonizing a government that they've conceded have the power and the majority against us. We don't think that's a good idea for minorities. We don't think that's a good idea for social movements. We don't think that's a good idea for vulnerable people. So,
do you think that just because less than 50% of the population doesn't support the equality of the minority, they shouldn't get that